You know, that one we share for example, and to build their land and land that to activities. What are the this all now? What are
I think I mentioned from the outset, we use CSS for those things. So those borders that you have lines and all of those things, CSS. Yes. All right. So let us go into talking about CSS in this class. So I'm just going to go ahead and delete some of these things so that we do not have we get confused. Now, when we talk about HTML, we want to talk about building web applications in general. Building web applications, you do not just build with HTML, right? I said HTML is structure. What's CSS? Styling, JavaScript, functionality or interactivity. Now, one thing about your your building blocks is that they are all fused into HTML. I think I explained that also. Now, this is how it is. HTML, yes, is what outputs the content, right? Now your CSS is now fused into HTML to style the HTML. Not like the CSS, you are going to open CSS again in your browser. No, they are what added into what your HTML. Then the same thing with JavaScript, fused into what HTML to give it functionality. Now, how do you now go ahead and what create your first CSS file? So again, the same way you created HTML, just write a new file. I want you to do the same thing. I'm going to call this style.css. Now, to create your CSS file, what is the file extension? .css. File extension of HTML is .html. For CSS is what? .css. So I'm going to create what? Style.css. Now, one thing that you also need to know is that your CSS has to be linked in the header, right, of your HTML. I mentioned this also when we're talking about links. That whenever you're trying to link to CSS, you have to link it in the end. And I also mentioned the reason. Once to remind us. Yes, because everything is at the end. Good. So now we're going to use this link tag, right? And we're going to link towards the href has to go towards style.css, right? That is where we are linking to. Now, before we talk about this one at all, in your CSS, there are 3 ways in which you style. First is 2 ways actually. First is inline, and second one is what? External. So when we talk about inline, inline is saying, oh, I want to style HTML from HTML. Rather than what creating a new thing in CSS and styling, I'm only in HTML. I want to style from HTML. Now, I want to style from HTML elements. Now you have inline, you have internal, rather, you have 3 ways: internal, and then you have external. Now, when I say inline is saying I'm taking this table up and I'm styling it as an attribute. So I can come to this table here, I can say style. So I'll go ahead and say style, right? Then I can say color, and I can give it, let me give it background color. I can say aqua, right? Now, if I save it up and I go ahead and I check it out, what do you have? You have a color of aqua. I can still go to the body and do the same thing. I can say, oh, this body, and I'm going to give it a style, right? Then I'm going to say, let's give it margin of 0, padding of what? 0 too. So if you check it out now, what am I going to have? I'm going to have, there was a space at that side. Well, let me just show you what I'm trying to say. So let me remove this. So looking at it now, there was a space there before around it, right? But I want to eradicate that space. That's why I put this margin 0, padding of 0. Now, if you check it out now, those spaces have been eliminated. Now, that is inline styling. Inline is saying I am directly targeting the HTML element. You understand? So that I don't have to now go back. I am directly, and when you go deeper in front-end development, right? when maybe you are now on your own, you started building projects, and then you want to go further, then you notice that there's a particular CSS framework known as what CSS Tailwind CSS rather. Now, Tailwind CSS now takes you from the normal way of styling externally in external CSS to inline, and that is where this is where it was built on inline styling, whereby you don't have to style with what with external CSS. You start directly, you direct that particular element and style from it. Now, this way of styling is nice, it's good. In fact, currently I do not use CSS again. I use what Tailwind. But apart from the fact that you don't understand Tailwind yet, and this is just inline. Inline CSS and Tailwind are two different things. Very, very different. But they have the same syntax for different things. Use inline that I'm seeing here is very, 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 very. First of all, I should say it's bulky. Secondly, I feel like it is. Yeah, I should close it. I feel like it is not neat enough. I'll use that word. Now, what's wrong? Now, good. I feel like it is not neat enough. And why do I say it's not neat enough? Because when you now start having to style very bulky things, see how long it's going to look like. So now, but when it comes to Tailwind has a way of what making everything look neat, even though it is inline. So now, for now, we're not going to do it inline. We're not talking about inline at all. What we're going to be focusing on is what external. But also, I'll talk about internal also, so you see what internal and external means. I've explained inline. Do you understand what inline is now? Now, internal is not saying, oh, okay, I don't want to style them inline again. No, I don't want to style them inline. I want to go ahead and what style them internally in that HTML file. So now what can I do to style them internally? I can come to my head and I can create a style tag. Right? Now that style tag, I can say, oh, my table, right, is not gonna have a background color of what aqua. Now, if you check it out again, the same thing. Then I can also say, oh, my body is not going to have the same thing. And it's going to say, oh, I'm going to give you a margin of 0. Then I'm going to also give you what? A padding of 0. Now, if you check it out now, what do you have? The same way, the same thing. That's internal styling. Again, you can choose to say, oh, I want to do internal. I want to do external. Depends on what you want to do. But me personally, if I'm using CSS, I don't do internal. Because I don't like it when my code is very, very bulky and long. I like it when every single thing is well structured. So now I've just showed you 3 ways in which you style. First is internal, second is inline, then the third is external. So that's that. Again, you don't need to understand anything I just did. It's not compulsory to understand it because we're still going to do it and you're going to understand it in details. So let's talk about CSS. Welcome to CSS. Again, CSS is very, very easy, right? Can be very hard too if you do not, like I said, put in the work to understand it. But it's also very easy. So now, when we talk about external styling, how do you do external styling? So external styling, you style in your CSS file and then link it to the HTML in the head. That's your external, which I think a lot of us should understand by now because we've done it several times. Now, one thing about CSS that I want everybody to understand is I will talk about a lot of things. First of all, we'll talk about selectors. Secondly, we'll talk about properties. Then we'll move on to talking about box model. Then we'll talk about position. Then we'll talk about display. There's enough time to talk about animations. Then we will now go ahead and talk about CSS responsiveness. Yeah, so this is everything I'm talking about in CSS. Selectors, properties, box model, position, display, animations, and what? Responsiveness. So this is everything we're talking about. Now, in CSS, right, what do you mean by selectors? Now, your HTML is also known as your DOM. Now, what does a DOM mean? DOM means document object model. Now, what does a DOM basically means? It's basically saying, oh, that's your HTML. That is what controls your website. Makes everything comes out, outputs everything, outputs the content. That's your DOM. Do you get it now? Now, for your DOM to now get styled, or for your HTML to get styled, what happens is that it has to be manipulated, right? By what? Whatever it is you are using to style it. In this case, CSS. Now, for instance, how do I now go ahead to say I want to style my H1? How do I go ahead to say I want to style my table? How do I go ahead to style my P tag? I have to select those particular tags from what? From the DOM, which is your HTML. Now, that's what your selectors are. Selectors are a way of what? Selecting HTML elements and styling them up in your DOM. Sorry, in your CSS. So what am I saying? In my index of HTML now, I want to style this whole table, right? I want to give it a background of aqua, like I gave you before. How am I going to do it? I have to select the elements that I want to what? Style. And I will style it up in my CSS. Now, what's the name of this element? Table. Good. So if I go to my CSS and I say, oh, I want to style table, right? And I give it a background of what? Aqua. What do I have? I'm not gonna have what? This. That is what your CSS selectors. And in HTML, so in your CSS, you have a lot of selectors. We're talking about 3 types of selectors. The first is going to be your element selector. Second is going to be your class selector. And the last one is going to be your ID selector. You don't need it. You can write it if you want to, but it's not really that. So you don't waste in your time. So it's something we're going to explain. Now, when we talk about your element selectors, right? What are we saying? We are saying that I want to go ahead and pick up elements by their element name. That's it. So, for instance, I can say I want to pick up H1, table, form, body, paragraph, span, small tag. Those things are what your normal element tag. So how do I do it? And one thing is that you need to understand the syntax of writing CSS. And CSS is not just like HTML. It has its own syntax. So what's the syntax? I can have my element name, my elements here. Then what I will now have curly braces here. Then it is now inside of it that what my styling will now go into. Styling will now go into. So for instance, let's say I want to start my table, right? I can have or let's use H1. H1, right? Now make sure it is curly braces and not angle bracket. Curly braces, right? I'm picking up H1, which is an element, and I'm saying I want to style this element. Now let me change the color, and also do not use it as capital letter. There is no capital letter in HTML and CSS. If you use capital letter, it's going to work, but it's not going to look nice, and it's going to confuse you a lot. So do not use capital letter in both HTML and CSS. Just use your small letter. Now, let me say color, right? I'm going to change the color here to, let's say, brown. Good. So H1. Now I'm just going to go ahead and have an H1 element here. H1. Welcome to CSS. So if you check it now, what do you have? Welcome to CSS, brown color. Do you get it now? Why is it brown? And why is the other not brown? Because I specifically selected H1 as an element. Do you understand? That's element selectors. I'm selecting element by their name. Now, before I move on, right, I'm going to talk about some things that I think they are very necessary and essential for you to understand. What's time? 1:22. For you to understand. So, let's talk about properties. If I talk about classes and IDs, we'll talk about properties. Now, when we say properties, properties are equivalent of your tags. Let me put it like that. What will your tags do? Tags will like say, oh, I want to output this for you, right? Write this content, write that content. But your tags And so your properties are now saying, oh, I want to help you style those tags. So your properties are exactly what style those tags. So for instance, this is a color. This is a property, right? Because what does it exactly do? Style tags. And I'm going to talk about some properties here. So the first property is going to be a color, which I think everybody should know. Your background also, everybody should know this. Then let me check some where I listed out here. So yeah, font size. So we'll talk about font. Then in font, we talk about font size, talk about family. Then we'll talk about style. Then the next one is going to be text decoration. Then we're going to have text align. What else? Height, width, yeah. So we're going to have height. We're going to have width. Then we're now going to have padding. And we're going to have margin. Now, this is going to be every single property I'm going to be talking about. So now let's start with color, right? So I'm going to be using this H1 to explain all of these things. Then before moving to other types of other parts of selectors. Now, your H1, right, as I said, element selector. You've selected it, curly braces. Now, let's say you want to have a red color, right? How do you write your color? So you write your what? Color. Then you're going to have a colon, right? Colon, then the name of the color, red. Do you understand that? Then you end it with a semicolon. If you do not end this semicolon and just move to the next line, this is going to be an error for you, right? So what you want to do is that end it with a semicolon, then move to the next line and write what you want to write. So let's have a background. I'm going to change the element. I'm not going to use this element. Let's use the table, right? And create a background of what aqua for it. So you can have a background of what aqua. So if you check it out now, what do you have? You should have this. And that is one thing about what your properties. What were your properties? We are still going to go into properties in detail, especially this background property. We're going to talk about it in detail so you understand it because there's a lot of background properties. So in background, you have background color, background position, background size, repeat, no repeat, all of those things. You understand them in details so that we can so you have detailed understanding of them. So that's background aqua. Then also in this H1, I'm going to change something. Let me say the font family, right? I can say, oh, I want to change this to Lucida Sans. So if you check it out, it has changed. I can also say I want to change it again to something else. So let me use this. As you can see, it's changing. That's what your font family. Now, font family, of course, a lot of us have.
What does that
You know what it do? Wait, so do you know what it does? Okay, this is what it does. So it's saying that it is changing how it looks, how the text is going to look. It's going to change it, right? Have you used MS Word before? Okay, that's why. Have you used any Word documents before? Have you tried to type before? So when you're typing, have you tried to change how your text looks? Okay, maybe that's why. Now, one thing is that while typing, there's a reason why this text here, there's a reason why this text that is here technically differs from this particular text here. And I think that's not even it's not very, very solid. I'm looking for something to explain with. Trying to see if we can have something like that. Good. Now, please look at this text here and look at this instructor here. Are they the same style? Do you have the same way of? That's what your phone family does. Phone family is saying, oh, this particular text here is going to have its own design. While this text is going to have its own design so that it looks good. Do you get it now? Now, that is one thing about what your phone family. Now, the reason why it's not called a family is because it has multiple styles. Now, one thing is that sometimes, so if you check it out here, let's just check it out. You have Impact, you have Iten Schweller, you have Arial Narrowbold, you have sans serif. The reason why you have 4 different fonts is because sometimes your browser is not Edge is a very old browser, right? So for instance, you are using Edge, your user is using Edge, right? Now, what happens is if Impact doesn't work on Edge? Or what happens if Arial Narrowbold doesn't work on Edge? What happens if this Schweller doesn't work on Edge? Now, that is called a family because in case one particular font doesn't work, it's going to move into what? Another font. That's why you can have what? Multiple fonts, right? Now, that's one of what your font family basically does for you. Just to have what? Different styles. Or, yeah. So now that's font family. Then also we have text align, right? I can have center, right? So if you check it out now, it's going to be centralized. You should understand. So if I change all your text, automatically are aligned to the left. You notice, right? Every single text starts from the left. So if you check it out, they're all starting from the left-hand side. I cannot go ahead and say, oh, I'm going to change to right. And this is not going to move to the right. I say, oh, text align to the center. This will move to the center. Is it clear to you? All right. So now I'm not going to go further in CSS today. We're going to be like starting CSS properly on Friday. So on Friday, we'll talk about selectors in details, right? Giving everybody that detailed expansion of selectors. Talk about element, class, and ID. Then moving into properties. Then after that, we'll talk about other aspects of CSS. Do we all understand everything we did today? Is it clear to us? Any question?
So, what if the fonts I want to use is not fine? Says family. How do I import?
You have to import. We'll get to that part. Any question? Any other question?
Just then to go back to the exactly do and
Sorry? Can you come again with the question?
if you are practicing
Yes.
all those properties like test like with your product shall be exactly like
Are you asking if I can just say, oh, I want to take text align up?
yes,
No, it doesn't. It can be in any order as long as they follow this pattern of semicolon and semicolon covering it. So as you can see, I make sure that I end every single thing with what? The semicolon. Can I see it? Semicolon, semicolon. You can just have any, you can have multiple. Yes, doesn't matter. Yes, doesn't matter. Any other question? Probably because it's not connected to your HTML. Are they connected? You need to link it in the head. Okay, you know what? In our next class, we're going to get there. We're going to talk about this. But one thing is that it should work if 2 things. The name that you're calling your CSS is still the same element name, or you're using the same class name or IDs, or you're also what? Make sure that you link it. If those things are not met, it's not going to work. You understand? So we're going to talk about it in our next class again on Friday. Any other question? All right. So we're going to call it a day in our front end class. Then by 2 p.m. we're going to resume backend class. So if you are in your backend, in our backend class, just take the next 27 to 26 minutes to rest and